Welcome to the Relational Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Wes Thompson, joined by my co-host, Austin Hill. Today we are talking about enmeshment, differentiation, and codependency. We hope this conversation is helpful. Thanks for listening. Howdy, Austin.
Hey, Wes. How are you?
I'm doing just fine.
Good.
Today I want to talk about differentiation, which is a fancy word for basically answering the question, how do we help others without taking on too much? How do we stay within our limits of what we need to own versus what others need to own? In other words, where do we end and others start? This is dealing with issues of codependency, of enmeshment, and codependency happens when we need others to be okay for us to be okay. And if we need others to be okay for us to be okay, that's not healthy. I don't know about you. This is something that I've learned about, read about, heard about, talked with others about for many years, and didn't think that I was a culprit of this, but I've realized lately that I'm actually really bad at this. And it's kind of, I don't know, we all have blind spots, we could probably have another podcast about that in and of itself. But, here recently, I've definitely recognized that this was a blind spot of mine, because as I've done more work, I think I've realized that I really struggle with this, actually. In other words, needing, in reality, I don't need others to be okay for me to be okay, but that's how I've often operated, especially with people I care about. I've noticed it in my leadership, even with people on my teams and when I was a pastor, people in the congregation. I used to, because I don't know, maybe I didn't want to think of myself as somebody who dealt with codependency and enmeshment, but I would justify it as me being caring. And caring and compassion they're both good things, but I think how I've noticed this in me is the amount of anxiety and stress I feel when other people aren't okay, and taking on the responsibility of trying to fix them and make sure they're happy, which is out of my control. I can't, I can serve other people, I can try to help other people, but I can't, I can't control other people's emotions and other people's well-being. And frankly, I can't, I don't have any power over determining if somebody wants to do their own work or not, So I know you and I've talked about this for years, just in terms of focusing on what you can control versus trying to control trying to focus on things you can't control. And differentiation and enmeshment, codependency, all these issues are really at their core, I think, speaking to that reality of what do I have control over and what don't I? And am I going to let other people's decisions rock my world and become my problem? So there's layers to this, we could talk about there's a difference between compassion and codependency, right? And I think sometimes if you're more empathetic kind of person, or you care about other people a lot, or you feel a lot, it's easy to become codependent and enmeshed and think that it's just being compassionate. And these issues are super prevalent in recovery, as we're dealing with struggles with addiction and the loved ones around those that are struggling with addiction. So, yeah, I don't know what comes to mind for you. I don't know. Is there anything personal even you'd want to share as we think about this topic?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, I think this is a really challenging topic. This is a lot of, there's a lot of thought in this one. I mean, I think the the first thing that comes to mind of many is that showing compassion and being empathetic isn't wrong, isn't bad. I think we swing back and forth for extremes where we realize like, oh my gosh, I'm being codependent. Being empathetic and compassionate isn't codependency. It's what you do when you are empathetic and compassionate and how you show how you respond in situations. Because I think being a maturing person, I don't think there's like a moment when like, oh, I've arrived on the codependency train where like I no longer deal with it. It's being aware of it and knowing how to hold other people's stuff. And I think it's naive to think that like I'm going to step into a relationship with someone and hold the crap, like hold it with them, hold this season or this challenge with them and it not affect us. Of course it's going to affect us, but we get to decide, is this something where, is it going to affect me in the sense where I am empathetic for this person and I feel bad for their situation. I want to help them through it, compared to a codependent way is like, oh my gosh, I feel bad for this person and I have to do everything in my power to make them feel better so I can feel better again. They're both starting from a similar place where I'm seeing some pain in somebody I care about. It's how I respond and knowing what is mine to hold on to. And it gets difficult with a spouse, our children, coworkers, and friends because we care deeply about these people. So I think what I really want to get across is compassion and empathy are not that's not evidence of you being codependent. Like the statement of like, and I believe in like what you said earlier, that like we need, if someone else being okay is the only way that I'm going to feel okay, that's a problem.
It's a problem. And that's something, frankly, I've dealt with. I think I didn't want to admit it or I didn't see it, but yeah, yeah, I hold a lot of other people's challenge and people come to me with challenge. Like, it's not just compassion. Like, I feel for them. It's like, it stays with me, in a way that causes me inappropriate. Like it's too much. It goes over the line, if you will, of just what's healthy.
Yeah. And I think that's what we're trying to find is what is that line to be a deeply connected person? And this is a line stolen from a book, The Failure of Nerve. It's
Great
the
book.
goal for a healthy person is to be deeply connected to others and self-differentiated. So you know who you are, but you're also deeply connected. So it's like you're walking in this constant tension of codependency or not. And we're constantly given options and choices and challenges to figure out how codependent do I want to be? Do I want to be at all? Do I want to go in one extreme, just like I'm just not going to let this affect me at all? I'm going to just be this blank stone that nothing affects me. I'm going to show no empathy and compassion because I am my own person. And that just sounds lonely. And then the other side is I'm going to feel everybody's emotions, and my emotions are where my emotional level is dictated on how everybody else is doing, instead of being a self-differentiated person and being like, I am confident in who I am, knowing that other people are going to have challenges the same way I have challenges. So yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, and just so everyone listening kind of understands what we're talking about, like differentiation, that word might sound like academic, but think about it. It's what we're talking about is really just our ability to recognize the difference between me and the other person. In other words, differentiation speaks to this idea that like if I'm going to help people well, I have to recognize that like I am here and that other person is there and we're not the same. And that codependency and enmeshment happens when that is what enmeshment, right? It's like the two become one. It's like I don't know where I end and the other person starts. And that's what manifests is like I need to be okay for them to be okay because I'm enmeshed in the situation. I'm not differentiated. I'm taking on tensions that aren't mine to take on. And that's where I think some people, we could hear this and misunderstand it. Because again, I can be compassionate and empathetic and not be codependent. And what that looks like, which I'm not the best at, is I can care, compassion, like show concern for the person, empathy. I might even feel some of what they're feeling. But that doesn't mean I have to become codependent, which means that I am taking on the weight of their situation and feeling the responsibility to fix it. Because anyone who's tried to help anyone else knows that like I can only go as far in helping that person as much as much as they're willing to go, right? And that really comes down to a control thing. It's not that I'm not caring, it's that it almost becomes disrespectful and dishonoring if I'm wanting somebody to do something more than they want to do it, right? That becomes a problem. And that's what we're talking about here. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about not being compassionate or empathetic. These are two different things.
Yep. I think here, this is a really good visual analogy of what being a healthy, differentiated person is. A healthy, deeply connected, differentiated person is like a strongly rooted tree. It's a tree who has strong roots, who knows who it is. And what happens to trees, like the wind comes in and it sways and sometimes it bends and branches break. And that's kind of like if we use like the wind and rain as other people. The tree is still the tree. It's still, and it bends and goes back and forth with the wind, but it is still a tree. It's still grounded in who it is. And then when it rains and it's torrential, the tree gets wet. It changes. Like it responds to the rain, but it's still a tree. It doesn't become rain. It doesn't become wind. And so like what we're saying in this analogy is your friends and family and close people are going to come around you and you're going to sway and things are going to get messy, but you're still who you are. It's knowing who you are and what you feel in context with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's a really good analogy.
Yeah. You're not a robot and you're not a sponge.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not these hardened, stoic people that aren't to feel anything, talking about like, yeah, the robot. But then like you said, we're not a sponge. Like our responsibility isn't to absorb the pain of the world.
Everything, because sponges absorb everything. It doesn't matter what it is; they absorb everything. There's like no, like they can't decide.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, to go off topic for a second, but I mean, I think it's related to this. I was listening to a podcast the other day. I'd be curious what you think about this. And this guy brought up something that is very simple, but I hadn't thought about it this way. But it wasn't necessarily from a Christian worldview or anything. But I thought it was really good. And he was basing it on a lot of research, but he was basically advocating for the idea that he said, I think our engagement with all of the issues of the world actually becomes a negative because he said, so many of us, especially those of us that are higher on the compassion empathy scale, we want to care about the issues of the world, but he said, unfortunately, because we're limited, when we try to engage in all the different pains of the world, it's hard to actually do anything to make a difference. And he said, if everybody just picked something, right, an injustice or a wrong or something that is bad in the world, if we just picked something and invested all of our energy or all the energy that we could into that one issue, the probability of the world being a better place would be much higher, because the problem is if we're worried about a conflict that's thousands of miles away, and then we feel this pressure to be worried about a conflict that's, two cities over, and then tomorrow we got to be worried about a conflict that's, whatever, somewhere else. We're inundated with like our capacity for compassion, our capacity for even just time and energy get soaked up by all those, and we actually don't make a difference. We just get upset about it. And he was advocating for the idea that he's like, I've been told I'm selfish, or I've been told that this is mean. But he's like, at the end of the day, and he gave an example of this guy that was doing this and was making a difference. And he was just like, but I think if all of us picked something, or picked a couple things that we were passionate about, and actually like spent years of our life working to make it better, that we would actually probably see much more tangible difference in the world than feeling this pressure to take on everything in the world. And I think that's what happens sometimes with those that struggle with codependency and enmeshment, is we tend to kind of, everyone in our life we care about, we try to pick up their stuff. And oftentimes we end up neglecting our own stuff. And that becomes a problem, because if we blow up, like who wins in the end, right? Like we end up trying to help others in ways that we can't control, and then we blow up. And it's like, that's where I think this becomes kind of unhealthy, and there's probably a better way to go about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I'm hearing them say is, let's care about the world, but there's a lot of world out there.
A
So
lot.
there's a lot of stuff going on. And so picking something like, I want to be a really good father to my daughters. That takes a lot of energy. I want to do something about addiction. I want to be a good husband. That will keep me busy 120 like all the time. And that does not mean that starving children in Africa, or the lack of healthcare in Latin America, or refugees in the Middle East aren't important. I don't have the capacity to do anything about it. It's still important. As a Christian, we care about other people, but the people that I can do something about, that I can soften the suffering, that's what I need to focus on. I don't need to be glib and just be like, oh, F that, forget it. Like, who cares about those people because I can't do anything about it? That's not what we're saying. It's know what you can do something about it, and then take action and do it, instead of freaking out about the stuff like, can you believe this happened? Can you believe that happened? I can. People have been crazy and evil the entire history of the world. Just read some history. People are always horrible to each other, and the people that make a difference in those situations are the ones that care deeply about what was going on around them. So do something. If you care about people, pick something that you care about that you can do in your context, in your community, in your family.
Right. It kind of makes me think of, like, again, the haha example is like, and I've done this, right? Like, I think probably a lot of us have done this, but in our modern age of like social media, it's like we might get on social media and like rant about issues, but not do anything about it. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Mm-hmm.
easy. I think it's cheap and easy to find the problems in the world, right? Like, I mean, just turn on the news or whatever. Like, finding problems is pretty easy.
Yeah. We can find them
but
pretty
but the
quick.
hard, yeah, we can find them pretty quick. But I think the hard part, the hard work, is identifying like, what problem do I actually want to contribute to, like, help and make a difference. And awareness about problems is noble, to a certain degree. But if all of us are only doing awareness and not addressing something, then the world doesn't change, right? I mean, our thoughts might change, our perspective might change, but really, often problems need action to gain ground and to be transformative. And so that's just to say, do we find ourselves complaining, lamenting, being upset, getting worked up over things, over a lot of things, and not doing anything? And I think, and I've found myself in that place, and I'm sure many people have. And I think if we find ourselves in that place, that's an example of maybe like, maybe I think this is tangentially, connected to differentiation, because it's like, what can I actually control? Am I getting worked up over things that Do I need the world to be okay for me to be okay? Because if that's the case, that's an unrealistic expectation, because there's always going to be challenges. And so what can I own, and what do I actually have control over, that I could make a contribution to the world around me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like here's a really personal example for me. So really care, like I grew up in the church, saw that there was this constant drumbeat that I would see and experience and feel whenever I read anything about Jesus or the Bible, and this is how as Christians should live. So I felt this huge compassion and push to do something about poverty and suffering in inner city Columbus. So lived in rural Ohio and wanted to do something about it. So my family and I moved into inner city Columbus, and I worked at a rescue mission. Um, all really noble, good things. It got codependent when it was just like, man, we moved into the city so that we could understand the issues, and they were a part of a neighborhood. So like, it's our neighborhood. We shared the same problems. But that doesn't mean that my family and I need to struggle putting food on the table. We didn't have to experience what it meant to not have a job. We didn't have to, live in a tent city so that we could serve people who lived in tent cities. Like, I don't have to be homeless in order to care well for someone who's also homeless. So that's when it starts getting messy, when it's just like, I have to go through the exact suffering to then get the permission to show kindness and compassion and help other people or befriend other people. It's like saying I can only be friends with people who are exactly like me. That's silly. So a
Yeah, that's
healthy
not going to end
way,
well.
no, it's not. So, I mean, not everybody has a mustache and is a middle-aged white guy. So, I mean, that it kind of limits who my friends can be, if that's how we're going to look at it. So it's not about, it's like all that compassion and desire to soften poverty and pain didn't mean that I needed to put my family through poverty, pain, and suffering. But some of my choices led to that, and that was not good. And so being able to differentiate myself and my family means that we made different choices than our neighbors. We made different choices than the people that were coming into the soup kitchen every day. And we weren't always, people were not always like, wow, I'm so glad you're here. Some people were like, you don't know what this is like. And I just you had to get used to saying, you're right. I don't know your story because I don't live your life, but I'm here because I care. I feel called to serve, not to live your life. I want to live my life, and I feel called to serve and be a Christ-like example here, the best as imperfectly and as I can, because that's all we can give.
That's really good. That's really good. I think, just to give a little bit of, I think, theological backdrop to this from a Christian worldview, one of my favorite verses in Scripture, because what I struggle with, it probably addresses what I struggle with most. But Jesus says in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I will give you rest." And as someone who is a perpetual striver, you know, um, having this need, which is unhealthy, to perform to be loved and accepted. The idea that God loves me for me, just who I am, is incredibly beautiful and challenging for me to accept often. And for him to say, "Come to me and I will give you rest. I'm the place of rest." That's really refreshing. And this is Jesus speaking, right? And so I think sometimes sometimes when we struggle with differentiation, at least for me, it's often like me trying to take the place as the giver of rest. And it's like forgetting that Christ is ultimately the giver of rest. And that's not to say that, oh, I can just go sit on the sidelines and eat bonbons, but it's like, it's in the work that I do. And I would advocate for the idea that in the work that all of us do, to remember that we're not the ultimate fixer, that Christ is, that God meets our ultimate needs and we can help others, but we shouldn't try to take on more than what's appropriate. Um, and just that idea that I believe, but I haven't lived out, right? Is just that because I know this in myself even, but it's like people don't grow by me doing it for them, whatever it is. Like they grow by doing it themselves, right? The best help that I could give somebody else is by helping them do whatever needs done themselves, whatever they need, helping them do it themselves versus me doing it for them. Because I don't learn when somebody does something for me, I learn when I do it. Now, I often need help, need guidance, I need coaching, I need advice, I need mentorship, I need, right? Like as we're learning things, like we need people to help us. But I wouldn't grow and get better if everyone was just doing things for me, right? It's people helping me do it for myself. And I think that when it comes to this topic, that sometimes gets lost in translation. We think we're helping by doing things for people instead of helping them and giving them the tools to do it themselves. I mean, a good metaphor for this is just like raising kids. Like I want Clive and Stella, my son and daughter, to be strong, courageous people, right? And they're young right now, but it's like if I do everything for them, they're not going to be strong, courageous people because the only way to build courage is to go through adversity, not around it. And I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they were in a session with a lot of coaches, and one of the people on the call was about to have their first kid, and so the guy proctoring the meeting was like, "Hey, everybody, write down a piece of advice you'd want to give your kids." And the one guy the oldest guy on the call, who was in his early 70s, who's got kids and grandkids at one point, he told me that his one piece of advice was, "Let your kid eat dirt sometimes," which
Yeah.
which is like a funny way of saying like, don't keep your kid from pain, which for me is really hard. Because I don't want my kids to experience pain. But then when I think about it in the context of this conversation, I have to remember that if I try to shield my kids from all pain, they're not going to be able to show up in the world and function. They're not going to mature as healthy young people and adults. Like we have to go through adversity. We have to go through the things and the toils and trials in order to actually grow. And the same is true when we try to help other people. If we do everything for them or try to do everything for them, we're not really helping them.
Yeah. Yeah. My house. So I have 3 teenage daughters. And something that we say often is like, we are kind and brave. We are kind and brave. And you can only be brave when you're afraid.
Yeah.
And you can only be kind when there is a need or demand for compassion. So that means we're preparing our kids, and we need to be prepared to be afraid and be put in challenging situations. That's a good life. Like if we're trying to create a life where I'm never afraid, there's not much purpose. Like in it, and that is like, gosh, that's scary, that I'm going to have to show courage, that I'm going to have to be brave. But that's what is healthy. It can be exhausting to be put in situations to show compassion, to be kind, to be empathetic. But that's a life well lived. When you're put in those situations and you get used to practicing those things, especially as Christians, like this tension between modeling a Christ-like sacrifice, which to me is a healthy, differentiated, deeply connected person, and then unhealthy self-erasure. And what I mean by that is like I disappear and I mean nothing. So I'm going to just give and give and give and give and give, and then take all this crap, take all this crap, take all this crap. That's not being kind or brave to yourself or to other people. So how that looks lived out, I'll just use another personal example because, yeah, you're right. Like, this is something that I laughed at the beginning of this, Wes, when you said like it was being codependent was something you struggled with and you didn't know, or like you're realizing how much it was. And I laughed because I was like, me too, man. Like, yeah, like it's something I think we all struggle with. And this example is, I used to feel that in order to be Christ-like, I wanted to be a Christian who addressed problems that I saw. And when I lived with my family, when I worked at the rescue mission, we lived close enough where I would walk to and from work. And my belief that I had to address the problems in my neighborhood, I would see 5 or 6 to work and 5 or 6 on the way home. And I was never on time. Never on time to work, never on time home. I would tell Chelsea I'd be home at 6. I'd get home at 7:30. She just started adding an hour and a half to when I said I'd be home, because I felt this unhealthy enmeshment with every problem. To be a community leader, to be a strong Christian, I have to address the suffering I see. And when you live in a neighborhood like the Hilltop or Franklinton or the South Side or Linden, there's suffering everywhere. And me not addressing it was, to me in that moment in my life, was denying who Christ was. I was trying to be Jesus. And guess what? Shocker. I'm not a Middle Eastern man born 2,000 years ago. I'm not Jesus. And knowing what is mine and what is Jesus's to handle, that took a lot of pain. That took a lot of me hurting my family and me ignoring myself. And that's not what Jesus wants. That's not what he wants for anybody hearing this. That self-erasure of trying to be Jesus to an extreme isn't healthy. Modeling Jesus' compassion and love to our families, to each other, to our neighborhood, that's great. But it's knowing that I am human and I am only caring about my kids, caring about my wife, caring about the people I can help. That's important.
Man, that's a really good story. Yeah, I relate with that. And that just comes back to our limits. I mean, in priorities. I mean, because limits require us to prioritize. In other words, like all of us only have 24 hours a day, 7 days in a week.
And we have to sleep.
And it's like, you chose to have a wife and kids, right? So it's like, most of us would say that our family is the most important thing to us. But if we try to address every problem we see in the world, we're not going to be able to show up to the people closest to us. And again, the question becomes like, who wins then, right? If I blow my life up, like, it becomes weird when it's like, okay, I did everything for the world and I lost my family. Like, I don't know that is good.
No, I don't think it is. Yeah.
So this is hard because it requires us to make choices and it requires us to be intentional about what we say yes and no to, because we should be doing something, but we can't be doing everything. And that's the challenge, because suffering it's everywhere. Like, injustice is everywhere. And so we have to stay differentiated, and we have to wrestle through our convictions and make decisions on what contribution do I feel called by God to participate in.
Yeah, and Jesus modeled that perfectly for us. So in an imperfect world, he walked everywhere. So and I use that story of me walking to and from work because Jesus walked everywhere too, and he didn't help everyone he saw. He took a break. He knew what his priorities were. He knew the things he had to do. He invested heavily in a small group of people, and that's what we should do. Invest heavily in a small group of people. Accept the reality. You might not ever be okay with it, but accept the reality that we can't help everybody. We can't solve every problem, but collectively together as Christians, we can soften the unnecessary suffering of the people we care about most. And if every Christian did that, the world would radically change. If every Christian today decided that I'm going to intentionally focus on a close group of 12 people and care deeply about them, the world would change radically. We would see a huge shift in every single socioeconomic anything.
And I'm guessing that, like, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, like this isn't some like la fantasy. It's the I think it's the frustrating thing of being a Christian is knowing we have the frickin' solution on how to make the world a better place. We just don't act on it well. We have these great intentions, like I want to save the world, but then we exhaust ourselves and then we hurt our families because we're not perfect. And so, like Jesus modeled what that meant for us.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that example I gave earlier with that guy. It's like oftentimes it becomes kind of insidious, like oxymoron, where it's like when we try to help everybody, and a lot of times we end up helping nobody. Where if we put our savior complex down and each of us serve the people close to us the best we could, the world would be a better place. It would be. Instead of us taking on the weight of the world, we could take on the weight of the stuff that's in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if someone's hearing this and you're realizing you're on one end of the spectrum, whatever, it's like, oh my gosh, I've been wasting my time and hurting my family. I'm just a piece of crap. Just stop. You feel like that for like 5-10 minutes. Write down those feelings and realize that
I've been there. Austin's been there. Yeah,
I all the freaking time, too much time. And what I'm saying is, it's not wasted time. The person that you spent too much time with, having a deep conversation with instead of your family, that meant a lot to that person. That's not wasted time. But we need to realize that let's spend more time with our families. Let's spend more time with our closest friends. Let's invest in those people a little bit more. That's good. So it's knowing that, like, man, I want to make this shift. You don't need to beat yourself up for mistakes in your past that much. If you really want to, give yourself 10 minutes and just call yourself a piece of crap for 10 minutes. But know that for the next 23 hours and 50 minutes, do something about it today in a positive way.
Yeah. And if there's a particular issue that you're really passionate about or is really moving you, we're not saying not to do anything about it. But what we are saying is, I don't know anybody, and I've never heard of anybody who can care about everything and make a difference in everything. So I would challenge you to, if you're really passionate about something, like pick something to do to address it, right? Because just being indignant and upset about it and not doing anything isn't serving you well, and it's not making the world a better place.
Yep. And then don't post about it on social media. No one cares. If you're doing it, like if you're only doing something good to post about it, to tell other people you did something good, you're not doing something good. You're self-aggrandizing your ego. You're just a tool.
Man, we could do a whole topic on pride and give a lot of personal examples, but yeah, exactly. Like, we got to be careful that.
Yeah, I've got literal journals of like, how big of an ego does Austin have? Journals full of it.
Yeah. Yeah. We must be mindful of, like, why are we doing what we're doing? Right. Is it to make ourselves look better, or is it because we really care about the issue at hand?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to end just 4 quick things. How do we try to, if we're struggling with differentiation, codependency, enmeshment, what are 4 things to look at? And I think the first one is really what clarity of role. I'm just calling it clarity of role. Helping doesn't mean doing everything. It means knowing your lane, knowing your capacity, and what you're uniquely positioned to offer. Sometimes support looks like guiding, not carrying. So what is your role in the situation?
It's a learned practice. It's a practice. Just do it again and again and again. You get better and better at it, and you will never be perfect at it. So never stop learning.
Yeah. Yep. So a question here would be, if you don't know, if somebody brings something to you, or your heart aches for something, and you're already, you're loaded up with commitments already, like, a good question to ask yourself is, what am I responsible for here? What am I not responsible for here? Like we all need to be mindful of what responsibility are we taking on, and is it appropriate? Is this my tension to hold? Sometimes it might be, oftentimes it's not. And we need to be mindful of that.
So clarity of role.
Clarity of role. Number two, we talk about boundaries a lot, and sometimes boundaries feel rigid and cold to people, but we need to see boundaries as compassion. In other words, boundaries aren't walls. Boundaries are more like fences with gates. In other words, they let in what you can handle and gently keep out what you can't. Saying no or not now can actually be the most helpful thing for both sides.
Yep. Yeah. It's not a failure of compassion. Saying no or not now is not a failure of compassion. It's stewarding our gifts that God gave us and our energy in a mature, wise way for our, not just ourselves, but for our families, our friends, our coworkers, our jobs. It's a saying no is a compassionate thing because it lets us be really good at the things that actually are within our control.
Yep. So a question we might ask ourselves again when we're faced with something and it butts up against our boundaries is to ask myself, is my support sustainable? In other words, if I say yes to this, am I able to really do it? Do I have the ability to do it for the long haul? Because oftentimes what we say yes to, it's not just a one-off. Maybe it's like a month commitment or a year commitment. It's like what I'm doing now, what I've just committed to, is it sustainable? Or is it rooted in guilt, fear, or urgency? Right? Am I doing this because I'm convicted to, or am I doing it because I just feel guilty, or because I'm afraid, or because somebody or something's coming to me urgent and I feel the pressure to take on that urgency myself? The third one is empowering, not enabling. In other words, the goal of differentiation isn't to do for the person. It's to support so that they can do it for themselves. Helping someone build their own capacity is the most respectful, enduring gift we can give.
Yep. And a good first step is let's do this together, doing it with somebody.
Yes. Yep.
Doing it with somebody, not for them, but with them.
That's good.
That means they are a co-collaborator, co-worker. They're a peer in this job. And if they're not good at it, thank goodness you're there to do it with them so they can do this someone else. That's what giving dignity to somebody is.
Yep. That's good. And then a question to ask ourselves in the moment, if we're not sure if we're crossing a line, is in me doing this, am I building dependency or am I encouraging independence? In other words, this is where we got to be careful. Again, going back to your comment about our own ego. Are we creating a situation where the other person's dependent on us? Because that's not healthy. If we really want to help build strength in them, it's like, I am helping them in such a way that they are growing in their own independence, right? Again, our kids are a good example.
Yeah, and we're more deeply connected when we do it that way.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, our kids are a good example. Like, as much as it pains me, right? I love my kids, but the goal is to raise them in a way that they become more independent so that they can stand on their own 2 feet one day. They can do it on their own, right? If I try to keep them dependent upon me, I'm stunting their maturity. It's very selfish of me to do that. Which is the same when we help other people. Are we creating dependency or are we encouraging independence? And then lastly, self-awareness and reflection. Sometimes our desire to help comes from our own discomfort with others' struggles. And this is me. Being able to sit with that and not rush in to fix is a form of mature, differentiated leadership.
Yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind with that one is seek mutual respect. So it's seeking a respectful way for myself and those I interact with. So it's expecting other people to be respectful and then pointing it out when they're not, and then not allowing myself to be disrespected, or allowing myself and being okay and giving myself an out if I'm going to show disrespect to my family or someone else. So that takes a lot of introspective. There it is, introspective work, which is really painful and it sucks.
Yeah.
But it's good work.
It is. It's necessary work. Yeah. And what's hard about it is we often find ugly things when we do introspective work. Like when we look inside, we recognize that some of our motives aren't pure, right? Some of our motives are based on our own ego or whatever. But that's helpful information to find out, because then we can change, we can adjust, we can try it differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if that hurt from the past started from a good place, like it's like people who serve and help, it's because they have a good heart. But knowing that you can't just give until you're empty, you're just going to burn out. You're going to snap at the people that you care about, the ones that you want to help, because you're just giving and giving and giving and not refilling your own cup. Like we have to know we have to be self-aware of our own needs. That's not selfishness. It's being self-aware so that we can serve more people.
Yep. And so that we can actually be helpful and not make it about us. Because unfortunately, if we're honest, a lot of times our service to others is actually trying to meet our own need, which is the last question that we need to reflect on, which is, am I rescuing or am I helping to ease my own discomfort? Or am I responding to a real need?
Yep.
And sometimes our service is selfish. And so we just need to be mindful of that. We need to be aware of that, because when we serve others, if it's based from a selfish place, like we say often on here, like that doesn't tend to end well. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Relational Recovery Podcast. We'll be back soon with a new conversation. We'll see you then.